Okay, let's begin. Excellencies, distinguished experts, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. We are ready to continue our conference with the last plenary session entitled Ensuring Compliance with International Mechanisms After the ICJ Rulings. I would like to welcome our distinguished speakers for this afternoon. As in this morning's panel, we will first hear our speakers, and then I will open the floor for questions and comments from participants. We will break for 15 minutes at around 4 o'clock. I would also like to remind our speakers to stay within the 10-minute time limit set by the organizers for this panel so that we have enough time for discussion. I would like to first give the floor to Mr. Thembela Ngculu, Counsellor at the South Africa Permanent Mission in Geneva, for some opening remarks. Sir, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson. I must say that I'm speaking here representing my permanent representative, Mr. Ngculu, who is tied up somewhere in the building. He would have loved to be here in person. Chairperson, it is an honor to deliver opening remarks at this important conference that seeks to recognize the role of the international civil society in pursuit of the struggle of the people of Palestine. South Africa knows all too well the important role civil society plays. Indeed, it is thanks to the solidarity displayed by civil society during South Africa's struggle against apartheid that I can stand here today as a proud representative of my country, which this year marks the 30th anniversary of our freedom and democracy. You have asked me to speak on the topic of ensuring compliance with international mechanisms after the International Court of Justice rulings. In this regard, it was Israel's failure to comply with the initial provisional measures of the 26th of January 2024 and the worsening humanitarian situation in Gaza that South Africa once again approached the ICJ on the 6th of March to request further measures and to modify provisional measures based on new information, particularly widespread starvation in Gaza and the associated heightened risk of famine. Accordingly, on the 28th of March, Friday last week, the ICJ handed down the following provisional measures: that the State of Israel shall, in conformity with its obligations under the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, take all necessary and effective measures to ensure, without delay, in full cooperation with the United Nations, the unhindered provision at scale by all concerned of urgently needed basic services and humanitarian assistance, including food, water, electricity, fuel, shelter, clothing, hygiene, sanitation requirements, as well as medical supplies and medical care to Palestinians throughout Gaza, including by increasing the capacity and number of land crossings points and maintaining them open for as long as necessary. In addition, the State of Israel shall ensure with immediate effect that its military does not commit acts which constitute a violation of any of the rights of the Palestinians in Gaza, including by preventing, through any action, the delivery of urgently needed humanitarian assistance. Without full compliance, it is predicted that these deaths will increase exponentially in the absence of an immediate and unconditional cessation of military activities and the lifting of the blockade. This order was also in the wake of South Africa's call that all parties to the Genocide Convention must take the necessary measures to comply with their obligations and refrain from or support any action which might prejudice the right of the Palestinians to be protected from acts of genocide. While we welcome the latest ICJ order, we remain concerned that Israel continues to violate the ICJ orders and its obligations under the Genocide Convention, as seen during the attacks in occupied Palestinian territories over the Easter weekend and in the past few days. Notwithstanding this, South Africa's case at the ICJ, together with the orders issued by the ICJ, no doubt played a role in securing at long last the adoption of the United Nations Security Council Resolution 2728 on the 25th of March 2024, which demands an immediate ceasefire in the Gaza Strip for the holy month of Ramadan, and proposed that this ceasefire should lead to a lasting, sustainable ceasefire. In order to ensure Israel's full compliance, urgent measures such as sanctions and other economic and political measures necessary to restore respect for international law must be enforced. We regret that very few countries, including Israel's allies, have demonstrated the political will to force Israel to comply with the ICJ, or should I say, have not demonstrated the political will to force Israel to comply with the ICJ orders. We maintain our view that the only way to end the suffering is to end the illegal Israel occupation together with its apartheid practices. This will create conditions that ensure that the Palestinian people are ultimately free to enjoy their fundamental human rights, including their inalienable right to exercise self-determination, attain political independence, human dignity, and economic emancipation. Human rights and fundamental freedoms should be respected for all and everywhere, without distinction of any kind as to race, color, sex, language or religion, political or other opinion, national or social origin, property, birth, or other status. As we meet on the margins of HRC 55, it is important to reinstate and remind ourselves about the noble principles of human rights, namely universality, indivisibility, interrelatedness, among others. Ladies and gentlemen, our determination to promote and protect human rights and support the people of Palestine in their pursuit of freedom remains unflinching as South Africa. And South Africa will continue to express our steadfast support for Palestinian struggle for independence. And I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ngculu, for elaborating by South Africa at the ICJ, which serves as the important background to our discussion today. And I think you can hear the applause, and I can speak, I think, on behalf of everybody in saying that we really greatly appreciate this very momentous step that has been taken by the ICJ, by South Africa at the ICJ, and you have our support. Thank you. Next, it is my pleasure to present to you our first speaker this afternoon, Mr. Ahmed Abofoul. He is a Gaza-born attorney who works as a legal researcher and advocacy officer at Al-Haq, the oldest Palestinian human rights organization. This NGO is renowned for its detailed monitoring and reporting on human rights violations against the Palestinians under Israeli occupation. Al-Haq is known to have produced some of the early legal studies applying humanitarian law to the Israeli occupation. Mr. Abofoul is also a research fellow on international law and legal mobilization at the International Institute of Social Studies of Erasmus University, Rotterdam. Mr. Abofoul, you have the floor.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Thank you, Chair. And thanks to the organizers for the invitation. It is a privilege to share this panel with such great colleagues, and a distinct pleasure to be speaking to you today on behalf of Al-Haq. I thought a lot about how to approach this topic and how to discuss ensuring compliance with international law and its mechanisms while a genocide is taking place. Amidst a shameful indifference and complicity of some Western states, which often lectured the rest of the world about human rights and international law. These states represent the axis of genocide today. I could go on and tell you that international law does not enforce itself, which is also what tens of UN experts said in a statement on the 23rd of February 2024, urging states not to be complicit in Israeli genocide and other atrocity crimes committed against the Palestinians in Gaza. But don't we all know that? Out of respect for the Palestinian people, especially in the Gaza Strip, allow me to speak candidly and indulge in discussing Western hypocrisy, double standards, and selectivity. After all, international law indeed does not enforce itself. States have a moral responsibility and a legal obligation to enforce it. But before all else, I must address the context of the current situation. Unlike what some states wish to believe or actually behave, history did not start on October 7th. In the words of the Secretary General of the UN, the current situation did not happen in a vacuum. Indeed, it is the result of over 76 years of Zionist settler colonialism and apartheid imposed on the Palestinian people as a whole. This is also the result of 57 years of Israel's longest in modern history, belligerent, illegal military occupation of the Palestinian territory. This is also the result of over 17 years of suffocating military blockade on one of the most densely populated areas in the world, where 2.3 million Palestinians, half of whom are children, live in around 365 square meters. Over 70% of the Palestinians in Gaza are refugees who were ethnically cleansed by Zionist militias from their ancestor land during the 1948 Nakba. The origins of our world's so-called rules-based order can be traced back to the horrific experience of two world wars that happened in Europe. The idea that atrocity crimes must not go unpunished finds its origins in the Nuremberg trials prosecuting Nazi war criminals. While the Nuremberg trials were a significant contribution to the body of international law, international humanitarian and criminal law in particular, they were also the trial of the victorious. None of the allies were held accountable for the crimes. This, in my view, has created in the Western consciousness a sense of ownership of this body of law, a deep belief that this is their law to apply on their enemies and opponents, but they cannot envisage a scenario in which they are, or their allies, are the ones being held accountable by this body of law. Guided by Zionism, its European, racist, settler colonial, inherently genocidal, exceptionalist, and expansionist ideology, Israel is an extension of Western colonialism and imperialism in our region. This has been clear, especially to us Palestinians, from the very beginning. As a matter of fact, the statements of the founding fathers of Zionism leave no room for interpretation or doubt about its settler colonial European origins. Also, don't take my word for it. Take it from Alexander Haig, who was the US Secretary of State under President Reagan and was the White House Chief of Staff under Presidents Nixon and Ford. He once described Israel as, and I quote, the largest American aircraft carrier in the world that cannot be sunk. End of quote. But by now, it should have become clear to the whole world as well that Israel is indeed extension of European colonialism and imperialism. Take, for example, what Israel has been saying to the world since October 7th, rather to its Western allies, the axis of genocide. In addition to the dehumanizing language against the Palestinians, like describing them as human animals, and the continued reference to to some of the colonial racist sentiments, like this is a war between children of the light, children of the dark, the civilized and the savage, or that this is a war on behalf of the West, as well as referring to what the Allies did in World War II, like the bombing of Dresden or Hiroshima and Nagasaki. All of this was directed to the West. Basically, Israel is telling its allies, you did this before, including against indigenous people across the world. Why can't we do it? Be it in the Americas, Africa, Asia, or elsewhere, the horrific and unforgivable crimes of slavery and colonialism continue to shape our world, including its structural injustices. Israel's genocide in Gaza and the world's reaction to it is our window to the reality of this world. A reminder that we don't live in a post-colonial world, but rather we live in a neo-colonial and an imperial one. The genocide in Gaza is also a preview of the dystopian future ahead all of us if we were to allow it in Palestine, in Gaza in particular. Therefore, I believe that the world owes the Palestinian people a lot, especially the people of Gaza. The world will wake up one day to realize that the Palestinians, especially in Gaza, were spearheading the resistance to this domination formula. The world will realize at some point that the Palestinian people, especially in Gaza, have been fighting on behalf of the world for a better future for all of us. The world will realize that this struggle is a struggle for all of us, the allies of humanity, against the brutality of the axis of genocide. But how did the West heed this call? The West has responded in a relentless campaign to undermine international law in support of Israel's apartheid regime, irresponsibly and shamelessly distorting the interpretation of international law. And I will give you some examples. First of all, self-defense. Western leaders have been parroting that Israel has the right to self-defense. This is legally incorrect. This is a flagrant lie. The right to self-defense is regulated under Article 51 of the United Nations Charter, a right to a state when it's attacked by another state, not a non-state actor. Even if there is doubt about a state's right to self-defense when it's being attacked by a non-state actor, there is absolutely no doubt that an occupying power does not have the right to self-defense against the people it occupies, simply because international law recognizes and gives the people under occupation the right to resist such occupation in accordance with international humanitarian law. The ICJ has been clear about this for over 2 decades, since 2004 advisory opinion, the Wall advisory opinion, where the court said clearly that the right to self-defense is irrelevant when it comes to the occupied Palestinian territory. In brief, as long as Israel is the occupying power of the occupied Palestinian territory, Israel has no right to self-defense, and the Palestinians have every right to resist. This is international law, whether the axis of genocide likes it or not. Another example is the ICJ. South Africa case before the ICJ, I think, represented global South's frustration of Western complicity, hypocrisy, and double standards. With the moral weight South Africa has and carries, the message was clear. This body of law is a human heritage. It is not Western property. It can be and must be used against the West and its allies. The same goes for Namibia's presidency response to Germany's shameful announcement that it intends to intervene in favor of the genocide in Gaza. The same also goes, and I think is also understood, by Nicaragua's case against Germany for its complicity in genocide and its complicity in international humanitarian law violation. The provisional measures plausibly founding a case for genocide, in my view, represent a slap in the face to these powers. Powers who have said on multiple occasions that the ICJ will be unhelpful, counterproductive, and South Africa should not go to the ICJ. By claiming also after the provisional measures that we should focus on what the provisional measures didn't address the ceasefire. This is what the US representative at the Security Council said. Although, in order for Israel to respect the ruling, it means effectively that there need to be a ceasefire. This is not my point of view. This is what the judges has said in the second provisional measures opinion. They made it abundantly clear that the first provisional measures order means effectively a ceasefire. Make no mistake, the provisional measures order invoke a positive obligation on all state parties to the Genocide Convention. But how did they respond? After the first provisional measure order, Israel accused UNRWA of supporting Hamas. The Western liberal democracies, the beacon of democracy and rule of law and due process, went so fast to suspend funding without even receiving a shred of evidence about such allegations. Later, some of them will reverse this decision because they would realize, surprise, surprise, that Israel is lying. After the second provisional measures, Israel, which focused on humanitarian access and humanitarian aid, Israel targeted a convoy of the Ward Central Kitchen, killing 7 staff, including Western states' nationals. The Ward Central Kitchen suspended its operation, and therefore Israel achieved its goal and will continue to starve the people of Gaza. But what is notable about this situation that preliminary reporting from the ground shows that Israel targeted 3 vehicles in 3 different locations and claimed it was intentional. What was Western states' response? They failed to even request an independent investigation for the murder of their own citizen, saying that Israel should investigate itself. How preposterous is that? Another example is the Security Council Resolution 2728, demanding an immediate ceasefire, where the US representative at the Security Council also went on claiming that the resolution is not binding. This is also, again, another lie, another irresponsible distortion of international law in service of an apartheid genocidal regime. Because of Israel's genocide, Gaza is now described as the largest graveyard of children. The West's complicity and distortion of international law has also rendered it a graveyard for the very basic principles of international law. In supporting Israeli apartheid regime and its genocide in Gaza by continuing to provide it with arms, diplomatic coverage, including US veto, Western governments are in clear violation of their international legal obligations under customary international law, as well as international treaties and conventions, including the UN Arms Trade Treaty, the Genocide Conventions, and the four Geneva Conventions. I would have also added the Apartheid Convention and the obligations within, but unfortunately, the vast majority of Western states, including the axis of genocide, until this very moment, are not signatory to the Apartheid Convention and refuse to ratify it. Ironically, while the people in the West marched the streets against apartheid South Africa, Western governments were the latecomers to denounce it. But they eventually did because of people's pressure in the street. It seems that Western governments are insisting on repeating such shameful history by supporting the genocide of the 21st century apartheid regime against the will of their people, including here in the West. Don't take my word for it. Look outside. Look at the streets here in Europe and listen to the people in the West. The clear, huge gap between what people want and what their governments are doing is evident. What's at stake now is not only the very existence of the Palestinian people facing genocide in Gaza, but also the very system of international law and the so-called rules-based order, as well as the West's credibility and reputation, if any left of it, especially in our part of the world. In providing this distorted interpretation of international law, the West is consciously joining Israel in making a mockery of international law. Do I need to remind you that it wasn't the Palestinian invention, international law? It is the West that created these rules. It is the West that is now irresponsibly emptying them of any meaning and is further contributing and ensuring Israeli exceptionalism. Make no mistake, the axis of genocide know exactly what needs to be done. It has shown us, in relation to Ukraine, for example, how it can properly and effectively mobilize the whole body of international law to support people's legitimate struggle for self-determination, denounce aggressive military occupation, call for arms embargo, impose sanctions, and unequivocally call for accountability, including at the International Criminal Court. All of this seems to evade when it comes to the situation in Palestine, perhaps because the perpetrator is a Western ally rather than a foe. The West's hypocrisy, double standards, and selectivity are shameful and brazen. All of the measures I mentioned, in addition to the urgent need for the reconstitution of the UN Special Committee on Apartheid, are long overdue to be taken against Israel's apartheid regime. I'll speak briefly about the West's moral responsibility in relation to Palestine and what needs to be done to ensure compliance with international law. The West, especially the UK, the US, Germany, and many others, have a historical responsibility when it comes to the situation in Palestine. Like my ancestors were massacred in 1948 by Zionist militias armed with British weapons and trained by British officers such as Ordie Wingate, some of the 82 members of my family who were killed in the past months were also killed by British, American, German, and other Western weapons. Have the successive governments in the West learned nothing of their shameful history? When will these governments do the right thing, deliver on their obligations, and live up to their responsibility towards the Palestinian people? History will not be kind to them. In this age of Western governments' complicity and full-fledged support for this genocide, civil society organizations around the world are challenging these governments from within their own legal systems, which in my view represents a test to all of these quote-unquote liberal democracies. At Al-Haq, we have taken legal action in a number of these states, including a case at the United States against 3 defendants, President Biden, Secretary of State Blinken, and Secretary of Defense Austin, for their complicity and failure to prevent genocide. We also have cases against arms exports to Israel in several countries, including in the UK, Australia, Denmark, Canada, where the government announced its intention to stop such arms exports. Al-Haq also supports other cases in other jurisdictions, including in Norway and the Netherlands, where the court decided that the government should stop exporting F-35 fighter jet parts to Israel. These efforts are coming from the people of the world through civil society organizations. This is a moment similar to that last phase of apartheid South Africa, where the people of the world were united against the apartheid regime. And today, the people of the world are united against the Israeli apartheid genocidal regime. And the Western complicit governments have to respond to the popular demand and will respond to this pressure, including from their own people. And at one day, they will live up to their legal obligations and their moral responsibility. I will stop there and hope to provide concluding remarks when I answer some questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Abofoul, for your very interesting presentation and your legal insights. I think you have provided a great deal of historical context to a lot of very, very relevant issues to our discussion today, and I'm sure it will be picked up by the participants later and be followed up in the Q&A session. Our second panelist is Mr. Saleh Hijazi, the Apartheid-Free Policy Coordinator at the Palestinian Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions National Committee. It is a global nonviolent movement working to end complicity with Israeli colonial enterprise in the OPT. Before that, Mr. Hijazi spent 11 years at Amnesty International, most recently as MENA Deputy Regional Director. In his current capacity, he plays a crucial role in the planning of the first global anti-apartheid conference on Palestine, whose objective is to enhance and intensify the mobilization and coordination for global action against Israeli apartheid and to set a program of action with supporting bodies at global, regional, and grassroots levels. Thank you for joining us today. Mr. Hijazi, you have the floor.
Thank you, Your Excellency, Chairperson. And an honor to be among you. And on this panel, I want to thank also my colleague and friend Ahmed for a wonderful presentation that connects directly to what I want to share with you. 17 years ago, when Israel imposed its criminal siege on Gaza, South African jurist, who was also previous special rapporteur on human rights in the occupied Palestinian territories, and current member of the South Africa team in the case against Israel under the Genocide Convention at the International Court of Justice, Professor John Dugard, said that Palestine is the litmus test of the international law system and human rights. The UN and the member states have been failing the test at every step and every turn for over 76 years of settler colonial apartheid. The ongoing Nakba is ongoing because of complicity by states, institutions, and corporations in Israel's systematic crimes under international law. Israel's live-streamed genocide, and as we have been learning recently, more about it being the first automated genocide against Palestinians in Gaza, supported by the US, UK, Germany, and other Western powers, may be the final blow to the system of international law. As the President of Ireland, Michael Higgins, has put it, Israel is bringing the system to tatters. But like at the time of apartheid in South Africa, the right thing was crystal clear from the onset: sanctions. UN human rights experts have called for an immediate arms embargo on Israel and for sanctions on trade, finance, travel, technology, and cooperation. This was repeated here again at the UN Human Rights Council last week when Special Rapporteur on the occupied Palestinian territories, Francesca Albanese, presented her report about settler colonial genocide, calling on member states to, and I quote, immediately implement an arms embargo on Israel, as it appears to have failed to comply with the binding measures ordered by the ICJ on 26 of January 2024, as well as other economic and political measures necessary to ensure an immediate and lasting ceasefire and to restore respect for international law, including sanctions. She also adds, within the General Assembly, develop a plan to end the unlawful and unsustainable status quo constituting the root causes of the latest escalation, which ultimately culminated in the Gaza genocide, including through the reconstitution of the UN Special Committee Against Apartheid to comprehensively address the situation in Palestine and stand ready to implement diplomatic, economic, and political measures provided under the United Nations Charter in case of non-compliance by Israel. This corresponds to demands from the absolute majority of Palestinian society. The Anti-Apartheid Department of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, the PLO, the Anti-Apartheid Committee at the Palestinian National Council, the PNC, the BDS Movement, the Palestinian Human Rights Organization Council, the Palestinian NGO Network, in welcoming the ICJ decision, which confirmed the plausibility of genocide, have called on states to impose a two-way military embargo on Israel, work to adopt a mandatory arms embargo on it at the UN, and adopt other punitive measures to prevent and suppress its acts of genocide and end the provision of economic and diplomatic support to it. The organizations, which is the broadest coalition in Palestinian society, also add to impose lawful and proportionate economic sanctions and other countermeasures on Israel, including cancelling all free trade and cooperation agreements until it adheres to its obligations under international law. The PLO, PNC, BDS, FROC, PINGO have come together in 2022 and launched the historic Unified Palestinian Call to dismantle Israel's settler colonialism and apartheid, and called on governments, parliaments, and political parties in the Arab world and globally to contribute to dismantling Israel's regime of settler colonialism and apartheid, starting with imposing a comprehensive military and security embargo on it, ending all commercial and financial agreements with it, and banning all products of companies complicit in its occupation, colonization, and apartheid. It also calls on all governments to treat the Israeli occupation's political, security, and military leaders as war criminals by trying them and banning them from entering their countries, and by putting pressure on the ICC, the International Criminal Court, to try them as well. These demands are not for charity. These are obligations on states individually and collectively. The Genocide Convention obligates states, as we've heard from the lawyers yesterday and today, to refrain from being complicit through aid or assistance. The moment the state becomes aware of the existence of a serious risk that genocide will be committed, failing to prevent genocide, let alone providing aid or assistance to Israel while possibly perpetrating genocide, makes states complicit. It is a legal obligation as well as a popular worldwide demand. Millions of people have taken to the streets for the past 6 months, demanding Israel to stop its crimes, for a ceasefire, and for systemic change. The global, nonviolent, anti-racist movement, the Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions movement, BDS, has grown substantially with unmistakable impact. BDS works to dismantle Israel's settler colonialism and apartheid as a precondition for the realization of Palestinian inalienable rights, including the right to self-determination and the right of Palestinian refugees to return. Over the last 18 years, the BDS movement has built a massive network worldwide, supported by trade unions, farmers' coalitions, as well as racial, social, gender, and climate justice movements, together representing tens of millions. It has had a large impact on isolating apartheid Israel, including by making large multinationals like G4S, Veolia, Orange, HP, Puma, and others totally or partially end their complicity in its crimes against indigenous Palestinians. The movement, with its many partners, have been intensifying pressure on policymakers to end the complicity of states and corporations in Israel's war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide through mainstreaming its now widely accepted analysis of Israel as an apartheid state and advocating for targeted lawful sanctions, particularly a comprehensive two-way arms embargo as a fulfillment of legal obligations under international law. As Reverend Frank Ciccani told us yesterday, it is only through pressure, through building of people power, that we can force the change we want. Recent actions by governments and parliaments show that it is indeed possible to do the right thing. Bolivia has suspended diplomatic relations with Israel, while Chile, Colombia, Chad, Honduras, Turkey, and Jordan, among others, have downgraded relations with it. The African Union has effectively suspended Israel's observer status. On February 29th, Colombian President Gustavo Petro announced the full suspension of arms purchases from Israel. Belgium's regional government of Wallonia has suspended 2 arms export licenses to Israel. The deputy prime ministers of Belgium and Spain have called for suspending the EU association treaty with Israel, imposing a general arms embargo, or even imposing sanctions under the EU's global human rights sanctions regime. On the 29th of February, the Spanish Socialist Workers' Party, the main ruling party in Spain, voted in Parliament, along with others, in favor of an immediate suspension of Spain's armed trade with Israel. On March 13th, the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Spanish Parliament voted in favor of stopping arms trade with Israel. Norway's Sovereign Fund, the world's largest, has recently announced by November 2023, it had divested entirely its almost $500 million worth of Israel bonds. Israel bonds have been a major target for the BDS movement. The largest trade union federation, LO, with 1 million members, has played a significant role in this. Several Danish pension funds have excluded and divested from Israeli companies, including banks involved in Israel's illegal settlements. The Norwegian government has advised Norwegian companies not to engage in businesses, corporations, or trade to perpetuate the illegal Israeli settlements. On the 3rd of January, the Human Rights Commission of the Chilean Senate approved a bill to ban trade with Israeli settlements. The Malaysian government has banned all ships owned by Israel, particularly those of the Israeli shipping company ZIM, in response to Israel's violations of international law, a decision bolstered by the persistent efforts also of BDS in Malaysia. The Canadian Parliament voted to end arms exports to Israel on March 18th, while over 130 British MPs have called for banning all arms sales to Israel. The city of Barcelona in Catalonia has taken a historic step by severing all ties with Israel due to its apartheid system and war crimes committed against Palestinians in Gaza, setting a precedent in Europe. This has followed a campaign led by BDS in Catalonia. The government of Jordan has announced the rejection of an electricity for water deal with Israel, following also significant public pressure spearheaded by BDS Jordan. The New Zealand Regional Council of Environment Canterbury has voted not to work with companies that do businesses with illegal Israeli settlements in the OPT. Despite the domination of Israeli genocide-justifying propaganda in the mainstream US media, the majority of US voters now support halting or conditioning military funding and arms shipments to Israel. In Turkey, the cities of Adana and Antalya have cancelled the sister city protocols with Israeli counterparts. Respectively, this followed intense campaigning by BDS in Turkey. On the 29th of November 2023, the Ghent in Belgium City Council announced it will not purchase from companies profiting from Israel's system of occupation and oppression of the Palestinians. On the 10th of January, Derry City and Strabane District Council in Northern Ireland announced plans to adopt ethical procurement policies. On the 25th of January, Ireland's largest party, Sinn Féin, announced it's working on city councils across Ireland to implement ethical procurement policies that comply with BDS. The city of Hayward in California in the US voted to divest from 4 companies complicit in Israeli violations of human rights and international law. These are just some examples of what has happened over the last few months. Israel's total impunity, as the UN Secretary General has described it, presents a threat not just to Palestinians, but also to the international legal system and world peace. It is an impunity that has been built up by the complicity of states, institutions, and corporations, and this must end. The UN and member states have responsibility to put an end to complicity, and it starts with sanctions on Israel now. The UN Committee on the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People and its member states also must take action. The committee can request a convening of an emergency session of the UN General Assembly to put forth a resolution to impose sanctions on Israel, expel Israel from the United Nations, and reconstitute the Special Committee Against Apartheid as one significant action from the UN towards the dismantling of Israel's settler colonial apartheid regime that is at the root of the ongoing genocide and ongoing Nakba in Palestine. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hijazi, for your very insightful presentation. I'm sure you have also raised a great deal of interest through your very compelling arguments on what pressure can be taken by states and also corporations, organizations, to pressure Israel to comply with decisions taken at UN bodies, including the ICJ. Thank you. Another valued expert joining us today is Ms. Bethany Ellis, the Global Advocacy Advisor at Watchlist in New York. Ms. Ellis is responsible for leading advocacy initiatives to advance the children and armed conflict agenda at the UN and related bodies. Prior to joining Watchlist, she served as a research consultant for Save the Children offices in Germany and Serbia, analyzing the impact of European refugee and asylum policies on the protection of displaced children. The Committee Bureau was keen on having a representative from Watchlist on this panel, although not directly related to the ICJ, as this organization is actively advocating to the Security Council, an equally important body on grave violations committed against children, including Palestinian children. With the upcoming SG report on the situation of children in armed conflict, we are keen to hear about your advocacy efforts in New York and those of civil society working on this file. It is a pleasure and honor to have you, Ms. Ellis. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to the committee for inviting me to participate in this panel today. So as mentioned, I'm here representing Watchlist on Children in Armed Conflict, which is a network of 16 human rights and humanitarian organizations seeking to end grave violations against children in armed conflict and protect their rights. One of the main ways in which we try to do this is through defending and working to strengthen implementation of the UN's Children in Armed Conflict, or CAC, agenda. The Children in Armed Conflict agenda is one of the Security Council's most dynamic and widely supported thematic agendas. Through its 13 resolutions over the past 25 years, the CAC agenda has worked to strengthen the normative framework for protecting children in war, streamline data collection and analysis on the impact of war on children, and spur conflicting parties to take concrete, time-bound actions to end grave violations against children, prevent their occurrence, and comply with international law. In 2005, with its Resolution 1612, the Council established the Monitoring and Reporting Mechanism, or MRM, to document and verify instances of the 6 grave violations, which include the recruitment and use of children, the killing and maiming of children, rape and other forms of sexual violence against children, attacks on schools and hospitals, abduction, and the denial of humanitarian access. Watchlist works on every situation in the CAC agenda, so all of those included in the annual reports of the Secretary General. And child protection concerns in Israel and Palestine have been included in each annual report on CAC since 2005. It is regularly among the situations with some of the highest numbers of verified grave violations in the whole report, the overwhelming majority of which are attributed to Israeli government forces, and the overwhelming majority of identified child victims and survivors of these grave violations are Palestinian children. For example, in the 2023 annual reports released last June, the UN verified 3,133 grave violations against 1,139 Palestinian children and 8 Israeli children between January 1st and December 31st, 2022. This was the situation with the second highest number of grave violations overall in the CAC report, only surpassed by the Democratic Republic of the Congo. In that same report, the UN found Israeli forces responsible for killing 50 children and injuring an additional 933, 110 attacks on schools and hospitals, the recruitment and use of 3 children as human shields, and 1,863 incidents of the denial of humanitarian access. The UN also verified over 100 grave violations by Palestinian armed groups. Neither Israeli forces nor Palestinian armed groups were listed in the annexes for grave violations. In fact, despite its long-standing presence on the agenda, and despite the UN consistently verifying high numbers of grave violations against children, neither Israeli government forces nor any other party have ever been included in the annexed list of perpetrators to the reports. This is sometimes referred to as the list of shame, and it's meant to identify all parties who have committed a pattern of grave violations against children during the reporting period. In March 2021, Watchlist convened a group of international experts on children's rights who carried out an independent assessment of all listing and delisting decisions taken by the Secretary General with regard to the annexes between 2010 and 2020. In their assessment, this group found Israel was one of 8 particularly severe examples of inconsistency between the report and the list of perpetrators, in which parties were responsible for killing and maiming over 100 children in the course of a single-year reporting period, yet were not listed. In fact, between 2015 and 2020, the UN had attributed over 6,000 child casualties to Israeli forces, yet they have never been listed for this or any other violation. In response to this disconnect between the information contained in the Secretary General's annual reports and those parties who appeared in the annexes, Watchlist began publishing our Credible List report in 2017 with our recommendations for new and additional listings in the upcoming reports for the following year. Our recommendations with regard to Israel and Palestine have varied through the years based on available evidence, yet one recommendation has remained consistent. In every iteration of this report since 2017, Watchlist has recommended and strongly advocated for Israeli government forces to be listed for killing and maiming children. So why is the listing important? Listing is meant to spur concrete time-bound commitments in the form of joint action plans with the UN to end and prevent violations for which parties are listed. In fact, the only way specified by the established criteria on listing and delisting to get off of this list is to fully implement an action plan and to end the violation for which they are listed for one full reporting period. The only other way to get off the list is to cease to exist as an armed party to conflict. Listing triggers the establishment of the formal MRM system in country, supported by the country task force on monitoring and reporting. It also means that the Security Council Working Group on CAC will receive reports on the situation of children in the country and will adopt a set of conclusions with specific recommendations to relevant parties, among other actions available to the working group. Listing sends a signal. No government wants to appear on the same list of child rights violators as the Islamic State or Boko Haram, for example. And finally, the Security Council has specifically mandated that the SG name these parties in its resolutions on CAC. In light of the severity, gravity, and scale of the ongoing violations that we are witnessing, it may seem odd to go into all this background, which now pales in comparison. But I've chosen to do so to demonstrate that this climate of impunity that was mentioned by speakers yesterday and also today as contributing to the situation that we are in today, also extended into the CAC agenda and to impunity for killing and maiming of children despite years of UN-verified data. This impunity was characterized by consistent failure to list parties, by warnings that a listing should happen in the absence of meaningful improvement, yet those warnings were not followed through, by the welcoming of collaboration with the UN and corrective measures while failing to see a meaningful decrease in violations, and at least some indications that both Israel and its allies, particularly the United States, have exerted efforts to keep Israel off the list. Since October 7th, as we have heard many times in this conference, over 13,000 children are reportedly killed. More children reportedly killed than all those verified as killed across all conflict situations on the CAC agenda from 2019 to 2022. In fact, the number of reported children killed in October alone surpassed the total annual number verified as killed in each year between 2019 and 2022. So the total individual annual totals were surpassed in just 1 month, and now the collective totals across those 4 years have been surpassed. Children have been abducted, children have been detained, schools and hospitals have been decimated. According to the Education Cluster, as of January 2024, 92% of educational buildings in Gaza either sustained damage, were being used as shelters for displaced persons, or both. And we are all witnessing the denial of humanitarian access at an appalling scale, which is particularly harmful to children. The protection of children in war is and should be a unifying issue that all member states can agree on. In fact, it is worth noting that the first resolution on Gaza that the Council was able to adopt following October 7th attacks was Resolution 2712, which firmly emphasized the impact of the conflict on children and demanded that parties comply with their obligations under international law with regard to the protection of civilians, especially children. In the coming weeks, the Secretary General and the Special Representative for CAC will be finalizing the 2024 annual report, which is expected to be released in early June. This also means that the Secretary General will soon be making his decisions about the listing of perpetrators. Nevertheless, it is evident that obligations of international law and special protections for children special protections that children are entitled to under international law are not being met in Gaza. In light of this, it is now a crucial time for member states to speak with one voice and clearly articulate their expectation that all parties to conflict who commit patterns of grave violations against children must be held accountable, that the list of perpetrators must be complete, evidence-based, and hold all perpetrators to the same standard when it comes to grave violations against children. Failure to list the relevant parties, Israeli government forces and Palestinian armed groups for grave violations committed in 2023 and, of course, ongoing, would deal a significant blow to the credibility and effectiveness of the entire CAC framework, with severe implications not only for the children of Gaza, but for all children living in war. Following listing, member states with influence on the warring parties should exert to the fullest extent possible their influence to end these violations against children, to urge compliance with international law, and to start preparing resources now to ensure children impacted by this conflict can receive long-term, sustainable support for their protection, healthcare, including mental health and psychosocial support, and education. I thank you.
Thank you. I thank Ms. Ellis for her very informative presentation on her advocacy efforts to advance the children in armed conflict agenda, including on the situation of Palestinian children in Gaza. I think it's very interesting that you've highlighted the inconsistency and the disconnect when it comes to Israel's reported violations and its sort of like not appearing on the list that is of violators that is being referred to the CAC working group of UNSC, and I think this will be picked up later in our Q&A. Thank you again, Ms. Ellis. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we have heard from all of our panelists. We will now take a 15-minute break. When we'll resume, the panelists will have the opportunity to address your questions and also provide some concluding remarks. Thank you.
It's better.
I call, yeah. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, if we all can take our seats, we can start the second part of our session. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, can we start the session? Okay. We are now ready to start our discussion. Participants are welcome to ask questions or make comments on the presentations that they have heard earlier today. Please introduce yourselves at the beginning and try as much as possible to be brief. So, any question from the floor? Please raise your hands. Yes, sir. Straight ahead.
شكرا سيد الرئيس. المتحدثين الكرام، كما أشرت سيدي الرئيس أننا نشعر بالامتنان لموقف دولة جنوب أفريقيا لاتباع الخطوات القانونية لإيقاف الحرب، والذي يرسخ لمبدأ اتخاذ الخطوات القانونية لحل النزاعات وعدم اتخاذ خطوات خارج سياق قواعد ومعايير الأمم المتحدة. سيد الرئيس، أوجه سؤالي للأستاذ أحمد: ألا ترون أننا بحاجة لإنشاء آليات إضافية تجبر الدول على التزام التدابير المؤقتة التي تصدر من المحكمة الجنائية؟ لأنه تصرف إسرائيل يمثل بعدم التزامه بتدابير المحكمة الجنائية سلوكا يشجع الآخرين على عدم احترام قواعد الأمم المتحدة وكذلك اللجان القضائية الدولية. فماذا بوسع الأمم المتحدة أن تصنع حيال هذه السلوكيات غير القانونية وعدم احترام إسرائيل للتدابير التي أصدرتها المحكمة الجنائية؟ وشكرا لكم سيادة الرئيس.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I missed your introduction. Could you repeat who you are, please?
الدكتور عبد الصمد مخلف، رئيس المنظمة البلجيكية لحقوق الإنسان والتنمية من بلجيكا.
Thank you. Any other question? If there's none at the moment, maybe I'll ask Abofoul, if you can address the question. Sorry. Is there any Other question from the floor at this point? Please. Yes, please, sir. We'll take another question first. Yes. Please, sir.
Assalamu alaikum. We have gathered here today at the conference on the question of Palestine. It's a privilege for me as a Jewish person to be among all activists and diplomats who are here today at this conference standing together on the right side of history. And I want to share with you the Jewish viewpoint. I have a big question today. We have gathered many times in the United Nations on the question of Palestine. For almost 75 years, we have gathered for the question of Palestine. Let's move to the next step. Let's gather for a conference to the answer of Palestine. But I think with my two questions, there can be a solution to the question of Palestine. The first question is, we have lived in peace, in a beautiful peace for hundreds of years. We didn't need any human rights group to protect us. We lived in a beautiful peace, Jews and Muslims, and coexist together. What happened after the movement of Zionism starts? When we will understand that what the root cause of this problem is, then we will have an answer for the question of Palestine. The second question is, how long will the world be fooled by the Zionists when they claiming that they're speaking in the name of Jews or the Jewish religion? They came to the United Nations a lot of times and claiming in the name of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that the land is there and therefore they can do all the crimes they're doing on the Palestinian people. We need to understand there is masses of Jews around the world who are standing in opposition to the state of Israel and their actions. So let's be clear and make clear in the United Nations that this is not in the name of the Jewish people, not in the name of the Jewish religion. When we will answer this question, when the world will stop this, then we hopefully can have an answer to the question of Palestine. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comment or question from the floor? Yes, sir, please. Please identify yourself.
Ture Karta, Jews United Against Zionism. With the help of the Almighty, I pray should bestow upon me his truth, his knowledge, that he may convey his message. We spoke, and my colleagues so eloquently spoke, and yesterday that just that it's quite clear and unambiguous that it's not Judaism, and that the root that the Zionists are able to basically intimidate the world and then eventually get support from the world, and what they're doing, it comes from the fact that they're using a religion and claiming that whoever opposes them is because of religion, and this is totally patently false. As we've mentioned many times, the Jewish people are forbidden to have their own sovereignty, and certainly not by killing and stealing, and not from a people who are so kind to us, the Muslim populace and the Ottoman Empire and so forth. So it's all really, it's an evil that masquerades in the garb of an angel. It's unacceptable. But I just was wondering to add that I was sitting here and we're hearing so many of the different comments and what the almost futile attempts to sway the nations to do something. I have a childish idea, but you never know. Being that nothing is being accomplished, unfortunately it seems, and every day that goes by is the death of so many people. And when one person's relative dies, everybody knows that there's a funeral, there is a funeral procession, there's the whole weeks of mourning, there's psychologists that stand by that person. Here we have this, and on and on and on, and the person doesn't forget their parents or their relative for years, and here we have this happening, not one and not two and not three, but so many, over 30,000. It's beyond words, beyond comprehension. Maybe instead of waiting another day and another week and another resolution, maybe it's time that very distinguished representatives of different countries countries who know that they are looked at with a different level than the average layman, there should be a gathering at the Rafah gates with trucks from each of those countries with food and say, we are going in, do something about it. Maybe it's time to take that move. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other question or comment at this point? Yes, madam, right at the end.
Thank you. I am a student at the University of Geneva, and I just had a question for Mr. Ahmed Abofoul. Since he's representing his NGO today, Al-Haq, I wanted to know if the events of the 7th of October has in any way affected the efficiency of your NGO, and if it added more work, if it affected the efficiency and the action and the expansions of your actions as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we can address some of the questions. Maybe I'll start with you, Ahmed.
Thank you very much for the questions. On the first question on whether we need new mechanisms, it's important to note the problem is not with the mechanisms we have or the laws we have. It's about political will to enforce them. And I can give examples. The UN Secretary General has an advisor, a special advisor on the prevention of genocide, for example. She has been completely silent in the situation, even until there was a provisional measure order, even after the ICJ found that there is a plausible case for genocide. The only statement she made before was only referring to the Palestinian actions, and there was even a letter by UN employees against and denouncing her biased approach. So here you have an example where there is a mechanism, its only job is to issue a statement when there is a risk of genocide and is obviously not doing its job. And I would say there is a political influence there. Take another example from the Human Rights Council. A few years ago, there was the so-called database, the blacklist of companies involved in Israeli settlements. It took us years trying to update this list because states don't want to provide funding for it. So the problem is not, in my view, with the mechanisms we have, is with the political will to enforce them. And I genuinely believe that people's mobilization on the ground will at some point culminate into forcing these governments to take concrete actions. We saw it in South Africa. Western governments were latecomers to denounce apartheid South Africa. It was the people that moved. And again, I think we're in a very a similar moment of history where it's obvious the huge disconnect between what the people of the world want and what the governments are doing. I believe there's a lot of things to be done within the UN, but again, this would still require some political will from states to achieve these goals. On the question from my Jewish friend, thank you for this question. It's important to note, and I think I would like to remind myself and you all, that in 1975, there was a resolution by the United Nations General Assembly declaring that Zionism is a form of racism and racial discrimination. The same resolution referred to the unholy alliance between Zionism and apartheid South Africa. At that time, it was already known, a matter of public record, that Zionism, that Israel has offered apartheid South Africa the so-called Jericho missiles carrying nuclear weapons. So Israel has been supportive of oppressive regimes, including apartheid South Africa. And this particular resolution was revoked in 1991 because Israel conditioned its revocation on coming to the Madrid Conference for Peace in 1991. So you see, even the whole concept of two-state solution or a compromise was a political maneuver by Israel to get rid of this resolution, and then it continued to build settlements. It continued to colonize the land. So I think we're united in this, and as Palestinians, we like to believe that our moral compass is clear. The Jewish people have always been an integral part and component of the social fabric in Palestine. They, as you describe yourself and other Jewish friends, they consider themselves Palestinians. They were part of our community, and until Zionism was exported to us from Europe with the feeling of guilt there, and the colonial and imperial ambition. Until that moment, we lived in peace and harmony. And we never had any problem. So I think Zionism, in my view, is the problem in this situation. The United Nations General Assembly was accurate when it described it as a form of racism and racial discrimination, and the only way to move forward is to the de-Zionization of Israeli society, because it is an ugly ideology. Just see where it brainwashed people in Israel into believing that in order for you, as Israelis, to survive in this world, you have to oppress the Palestinians. It's a sick logic. And it's harming the Palestinians and costing them their lives and physical safety. But also it's, in a way, the conflation between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, and that's something I learned from my Jewish friend, is actually harming the real and much-needed fight for anti-Semitism. Such conflation is dangerous, and I think we're united with our Jewish friends to always make the distinction that opposing Israeli policies as a government, it is nothing against the Jewish people. It is something against a Zionist ideology, which is again a form of racism and racial discrimination. The last question on the events of October 7th and how it affected our work, the Israeli attack on the Gaza Strip has been catastrophic since October 7th. For the first time, we had to announce that we're unable to cover the situation in Gaza properly because our staff lost their homes, they had to flee, they lost family members, including myself. But we continue together with our partners on the ground to do our best to document what we can. And thanks to the excellent level of coordination Palestinian civil society have always had because of Israeli oppression, we're still able to do some of the work. But again, as I said, we had to announce, and for the first time since our establishment in 1979, that we're unable to cover the situation properly. And if history taught us something, that in such situations where there are no human rights defenders on the ground to document these crimes, this often encourages and emboldens the perpetrators to commit more crimes. And we saw it. We saw Israeli soldiers bragging about their crimes, filming themselves torturing Palestinians because they feel untouchable, because the whole Israeli apartheid regime is premised on a promise of impunity to its soldiers in order to dehumanize and oppress the Palestinians. That's why Israel cannot afford any form of accountability. And those who in the West think there is any shred of possibility of Israel prosecuting itself or its soldiers and providing any form of justice, I think they're delusional. So I hope I answered this question. I hope I understand it correctly. Otherwise, please come back again and ask. Thank you.
Thank you, Ahmed. Anybody else on the panel? Saleh, do you want to add anything, address some of the questions?
Maybe very quickly on the issue of Zionism, and just to add to what my colleague Ahmed has put forth, is Zionism is the racist ideology behind that is at the heart of the settler colonial apartheid regime currently perpetrating genocide. You confront such racist ideologies with education, with culture, but when it comes to the structure of oppression, the structure of apartheid and genocide, what you do with this is dismantle it. And how we dismantle it, and this is the view of the absolute majority of the Palestinian people, is you boycott, you divest, and you sanction. This is action that people take from the individual to the community, to the family, to the city, to the university, the school, and eventually then states. And the BDS movement, this is exactly what we do, and this is the most ethical and strategic action that people around the world can take. We need to dismantle the structure of oppression with Zionism as an ideology at its heart. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Bethany, do you want to add anything to the discussion?
Yeah, I'll just maybe add one thing about new mechanisms versus political will, and that's, I mean, in the example of the CAC agenda, I think that's true as well, that there are a range of really robust tools and mechanisms available to the Children in Armed Conflict agenda, but the full range of those tools is not being utilized right now. Particularly for that missing crucial step of listing parties to conflict. The formal MRM is not triggered until a party is listed. The Security Council Working Group on CAC does not receive a country-specific report on the situation until parties are listed. So there are tools available, but until that kind of missing step happens, the full range of tools can't be brought to bear on the situation.
Thank you. Mr. Ngculu, do you want to add anything? Thank you.
No, not really, but maybe I should just echo what I've just heard here. That you know, it's important that we sustain the struggle. The struggle continues. There's a need to mobilize political will. I just heard that the tools are there, but we need to ensure that we continue mobilizing. It's a long struggle. I'm very pleased to see this level of engagement, the role that is played by the civil society in pursuit of the struggle of the Palestinian people. So we should continue. We should continue to work together to achieve the political emancipation of the people of Palestine. Thank you.
Thank you. We still have time for another round of questions. Yes, the lady straight ahead. Please identify yourself.
Hi, this is Tanya Bukhari again. I had a question specifically to Ms. Ellis on the CAC. It's very interesting to hear, and actually she just went in that direction just now. But my question is if you could elaborate on what happens in case now there is no listing, appropriate listing that is done. What are the procedures here provided to remedy to this? And what might you, Watchlist, or other actors do to ensure the listing? And it's also, as you've mentioned, it's been over many years that there's been lack of accountability that we're talking about also in terms of this CAC listing. So it would be great to hear your perspective on how this can be unblocked to ensure the protection of the rights of children in armed conflict in Palestine and for future cases too. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Very good question. Any other question from the floor? Yes, please, Romeo. Yeah.
Hi. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think you know my views. I'm Romeo Shamsuddin. I represent two NGOs today, the Perdana Global Peace Foundation and the Center for Human Rights Research and Advocacy. I have been working on this crisis since November. And in December, I came up with an idea for a flotilla of ships to go towards Gaza and challenge the blockade, the illegal occupation of Gaza. I was already working on that. People say I was crazy, then this idea is so out of the box, and you can't. And I was trying to form a 2,000 ship flotilla. That's how crazy it was. And in February, the U.S. Embassy in Kuala Lumpur asked me, how can we do that? Now, the U.S. State Department is asking me on my crazy idea how it can be done. Now, you see this in the next from November to February is 3 months, right? And now we come to April. We already have the World Center for World Kitchen, Central Kitchen already being adapted, and it is being shot at. And in the next 2 months, we are going to see hundreds of thousands of people dying. Now, I came to Geneva to find answers from all US team people who has worked on this problem for years or decades. But we are seeing this crisis enveloping, and we are going to even go into panic mode now. I have so much respect for Ahmed for doing great work, but we are doing things which are behind the curve, not ahead of the curve. And what I see, I'm sorry to say, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, we are behind the curve. In May, in June, the UN is going to be in panic mode. I would say in panic mode, because I can see the Americans are already in panic mode, and I'm consulting the Americans. This is shocking, right? I came to this conference to give two ideas, which is, one is peacekeeping, and another is responsibility to protect. I don't know whether the UN is committed to do this. And the next one is to value human life, which I also asking the UN to adopt, to find a way. What I'm trying to say, ladies and gentlemen, is I'm already on panic mode since December. And I'm willing to throw everything but the kitchen sink to avert a genocide to happen. Now, I know you all are our specialists in what you all do, child protection, anti-Zionism, finding structural ways to remove this. But these are going to take time. We do not have the time.
Sorry, Romeo, we need to get to the question.
Yeah, can we work on ensuring that we in the next few weeks?
Yeah.
That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm afraid we only have time for one more question. Then we need to wrap up. Yes. Please, go ahead. Gentleman, right over there, straight, please.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you to all the panelists. I'm David Wildman with the United Methodist Church and also co-chair of the NGO Working Group on Israel and Palestine in New York at the UN. I wanted to ask about, there's been a lot of mention of sanctions, and it does seem to me that also a lack of political will. And I'll just ask the panelists to talk about political leadership, because it seems to me that South Africa modeled political leadership. So thank you, Ambassador, for your country, that didn't wait for the political will of enough states to say that some action needs to be taken now. And so I'd love to hear more about the political leadership for an arms embargo, for diplomatic sanctions that go beyond bilateral. And specifically in that, I'd love to hear more about banking sanctions, because I know in the anti-apartheid movement with South Africa, the banking sanctions became the real key to transforming the struggle, along with many other things. And it seems to me that in arms sales, a bank is transferring the money for this, so it's not only the company and the government, but also the banks. And I'd love to hear how we might examine and challenge that. And then Bethany, I would love to ask you, thank you for your the role of Watchlist, but it just strikes me, in addition to the horrors of the killing and wounding and the trauma caused for children in Gaza especially, that there's been the schools are closed for, that the denial of education, the denial of health care. I was in Gaza in October a year before of 2022, and at a mother-child health clinic at that point, 25% or more of the children under 5 were anemic. So they were already compromised. And even if there's a ceasefire tomorrow, the health and well-being and education of children is compromised for decades to come. And so I'd love to hear how we might incorporate that more effectively within the watch list and demanding accountability for Israel's crimes. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we have to move to the closing ceremony quickly, but I allow one more question. If you can be very brief, Lady Rabi. Did you put up your hand just now? What's her name? Rabi. Huh? Tilda. You didn't put up your hand? Okay, that's fine. No.
on that point, with God's help, like I say, isn't it time, diplomats, dignitaries, if they could be, isn't it possible to go to the gates with, and it's maybe childish, I'm saying, but we're desperate now. Isn't it a possibility to cross through because they're committing genocide? Imagine if it would be by Hitler now, we'd be standing by the gates of Auschwitz. Would we be silent, or is it the time that people who are taking umbrage in this and saying that it's genocide, well, near that, whatever you may call it, that we should be standing and crossing over to Rafah?
Okay, I think very short one. We need to close.
So much. I just wanted to emphasize a point that Ahmed made, which is a point that's made by lawyers, activist lawyers working in jurisdictions abroad, particularly in countries where complicity with Israeli crimes is quite high in Western countries. The future of international law is domestic, and I think we need to really think about creative ways that we can use the law as a tool to hold countries and Israeli perpetrators accountable as well. Recently, what we did at the ACIJ was partner with the Palestinian Center for Human Rights to target the visa that was issued to Doron Almog, who was a general in Gaza in 2001 and was accused of a series of crimes and was infamous for evading justice by evading really an arrest warrant was issued against him in 2005 by a British court, magistrates court. That was a case that was followed up by the Palestinian Center for Human Rights in Gaza and lawyers acting in London. And we knew that a universal jurisdiction filing in our jurisdiction was probably not going to have any impact. But what we did was request that the Australian government refuse to issue him a visa or cancel his visa on the basis that he does not meet the good character requirements. So these are the types of creative thinking I think that we really need to think about. And the reason why we targeted him, of course, the more pressing agenda is the genocide that is ongoing now, but it really was emblematic cases of ongoing impunity over 20 years. This was a case that established really legal precedents of Israel continuing to flout international humanitarian law in particular. And, we talked about the weaponization of IHL. And that particular case is an emblematic case of ongoing impunity, and this is why we decided to take the case, even though it wasn't pressing in the circumstances.
Thank you.
So I just wanted to make that point about ensuring that we really try and pursue domestic accountability wherever we can and in however.
Thank you. I'm sorry to rush everyone because we need to bring the closing ceremony a bit earlier than scheduled. So I think now I can invite the panelists to address the questions and also make your concluding remarks. I'll start with Ahmed, please.
Thank you. I'll try to be very brief. On what can be done short term, again, this is a matter of political will. There's a lot that states can do. South Africa, of course, provided a model of what true leadership is about, and I think demonstrated what states can do, and I think was lecturing the hypocritical West about what is true leadership is about, and has given us actually some indications of what can be done. South Africa has issued warning for its dual citizens who might have been participating in the Israeli army and complicit in this genocide, that they can be prosecuted within their domestic system. This is something that all states can and should do. But in such situation, what need to be done immediately is an armed embargo on Israel. Israel is acting as a rogue state. Israel is violating international law and throwing or making a mockery of international law, especially international humanitarian law. And there need to be also sanctions, meaningful sanctions. Not what the West has been doing, sanctioning a few settlers here and there, while continuing to import goods from settlements, so basically financing these settlements. Why would you sanction individual settlers and ignore settlements. Where did these settlers came from? Did they fall from the sky? They came from a settlement, and this settlement is illegal. And there is consensus internationally that settlements are legal in international law. And it was raised earlier in another panel that what is the point of sanctioning individual settlers if you're interested in meaningful accountability? These states, especially those who are party to the International Criminal Court, let's envisage a scenario where the ICC will issue a arrest warrant for such settler. If State A is actually sanctioning this settler and preventing him from entering its country, its territory, in a way, it seems like some countries want to save themselves the embarrassment of having to cooperate with the ICC and handing over these individuals. So meaningful sanction should be about settlements, and there need to be a complete and immediate ban on settlements good. The price of these goods is Palestinian blood. Also on domestic accountability, I agreed. The recourse to domestic accountability also represents the frustration of the people, that if states did what they have to do, what they must do, if they delivered on their obligations, we wouldn't have, to recourse to such measures. But this is also an indication of the complicity of these states. And I agree. I think it's a test to all of these liberal democracies, and to test the system and how it will deliver. In conclusion, I think we the Palestinians are determined, to hold on to our humanity, despite the fact that the world has given us every reason not to. Because I do believe that neither Israel nor its complicit allies should define who we are or have a veto on our humanity. They can have veto at the Security Council wherever they want. They shall never have a veto on our humanity. We, the Palestinians, we are not the West's idea of us. We are not colonial subjects. We are free people entitled to our rights, including the right of self-determination and the right of Palestinian refugees to return. Let me be abundantly clear. We, the Palestinians, are not asking for more than our human rights. As a matter of fact, the world must understand, we're not asking for more our human rights, and we will not settle for less. As a matter of fact, we're not even asking. We're demanding. We're entitled to those rights, regardless of what people think, and regardless of what our oppressors and their allies think about these rights. I think we have something on this world, and we have to fight for it. We are on the right side of history, and we shall prevail. But history will not be kind, and will judge harshly all those who are complicit in this genocide, especially Western states and their officials who have blood of Palestinian children all over their hands. Thank you.
Thank you, Ahmed. Saleh, if you want to address some of the questions and your concluding remarks. Please.
Yeah, thank you. Chair, and yes, I'll address the question on the political leadership to impose sanctions, and say that change comes from and will come from the bottom up. South Africa has indeed provided ethical, moral, and strategic leadership. But as DIRCO, South Africa Foreign Ministry's Director General Zain Dangor has said in the press conference at The Hague following the hearing, that South Africa was also empowered by the millions who have gone out in the street demanding the change, those millions that still go out in the street demanding a ceasefire, an end to genocide, and accountability for Israel's crimes. And here I want to also take this opportunity to salute the trade unions and the dock workers who have either refused to handle shipments going to Israel or have announced that they will not handle any shipments that are going to Israel. I also want to salute the activists in Ireland who have been disrupting Shannon Airport that has been used by the US to transfer military support to Israel. These actions are taking place all over the world. This is how change comes. But as I put in my intervention, we have been seeing also from states and from politicians, from parliaments all around the world, that that leadership that is required. Petro in Colombia, the deputy prime ministers of Spain and Belgium, the Spanish parliament, and so on. You know, I've listed those, and if anybody is interested, those are actually can be found on our website, bdsmovement.net. But this is exactly the type of leadership. It is possible. It is taking place. We need the other countries to heed the call. This is a Palestinian call that is carried by the millions around the world. Sanction Israel, starting with a military embargo. Don't send or sell weapons to an apartheid state committing genocide. Don't buy weapons from an apartheid state committing genocide. And don't transfer or allow weapons to be transferred through your states. On the banking sanctions, there's no wheel to be reinvented, right? We've seen just a few months ago a series of financial and economic sanctions that have been imposed by member states and by international bodies on Russia. We have, if you want, a playbook here. We have the experience also, as you pointed out, the case of apartheid in South Africa. And here I think it's important to point out that all Israeli banks are complicit in crimes under international law. All Israeli banks are listed on the UN database of companies that are complicit in war crime of illegal settlements. And these are integral to then the banking section. So this is one part of it. The other part of it is that if the banks are making money out of war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide, this takes us also to an area of financial crimes. So it's not only linking to crimes under international criminal law. There are financial crimes that can also be examined in national jurisdictions as well. But I want to stress here again, we're not inventing anything. All of these sanctions exist. There are the guidelines. There is the playbook. We just need the politicians, parliamentarians, governments to heed the call of millions of people around the world to impose sanctions on Israel and the genocide, dismantle settler colonial apartheid. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Bethany, you have at least one specific question to answer and your concluding remarks, please.
Thank you. On the question of what happens if there is no listing, I wish that we were unfamiliar with the feeling of opening up the report and realizing that parties who should be listed don't appear. Unfortunately, we have seen that for several years. So what do? We continue to support those efforts of those who are documenting grave violations. We continue to support our partners who are operational on the ground, supporting children and protecting their rights. And we look at supporting our members who are advocating for specific actions in other arenas, such as by individual member states. But given the scale and the step change that we're seeing in the number of reported violations this year, and of course those are reported, so we don't know what the verified numbers will look like that the UN releases in the report. We really genuinely hope that we will not see an absence of listed perpetrators this year for Israel and Palestine. And we really do want to reiterate the call to member states that now is the time, as the Secretary General starts to finalize those decisions about the listing, to reiterate the expectation that all perpetrators of grave violations will be listed in the annexes as appropriate if they've committed a pattern of grave violations against children. So please do convey that message to the Secretary General and make it clear that there is a standard that you're expecting, that the report will live up to. On David's question about lack of education and healthcare and the impact for decades to come on children, absolutely. That's, I think, exactly why attacks on schools and hospitals are also one of the 6 grave violations. That is a trigger and is a trigger for listing as well. And also, I'd reiterate the call on member states to start working on ensuring resources now that will support long-term child protection services, including, crucially, their mental health and their psychosocial support. Child protection overall in humanitarian funding is a very, very small percent. The Alliance for Child Protection and Humanitarian Action has done a number of really good reports and showing exactly how little the proportion is that goes to child protection. So getting that funding in place and recognizing that it's a long-term commitment and needs predictable funding over a sustained amount of time is another crucial step that can be taken now. Thank you.
Thank you, Bethany. Mr. Ngculu, do you have maybe some short concluding remarks, please?
Thank you very much, Chair. Well, by way of closing, I must say that South Africa is getting a lot of positive feedback on the actions that we've taken on the situation in the occupied Palestinian territories. And that serves as the source of courage and motivation, really. We will stay the course. We regard this as a very principled decision that we took. We knew there could be some consequences, but we'll stay the course. We are delighted, really, as the country, that many countries have expressed the will and the wish to join the case. Going forward, we've seen countries taking very conscious and strategic decisions to recall ambassadors in order to pile pressure on Israel to do the right thing. I've taken note of the sentiments expressed here about the need to pile pressure at all levels, including on the banking sector. That's the message that we'll continue to support. We indicated not too long ago, and consistently we keep on doing that, that we should pile pressure at all levels. There should be economic sanctions against Israel to ensure that they comply with the provisional measures. We do want to mention that ceasefire is not necessarily the end goal. The end and the ultimate goal is to end the occupation itself, to ensure that the people of Palestine live in peace, they attain their political and economic freedom. And we believe, as it was indicated here earlier, that people of Palestine will prevail at the end of the day. If we thought apartheid was a dinosaur, this is nothing. But I believe that we will, in our lifetime, see a free Palestine, a two-state solution living side by side in our lifetime. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ngculu. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, this concludes our deliberations of Plenary 4. On behalf of the committee, I would like to thank you for your participation, and I especially would like to put on record our deep appreciation to the panelists who have contributed to our discussion with a very, very profound elaboration and deliberations on the topic this afternoon. So they deserve a round of applause, I think. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. So, please remain in the room because the closing ceremony will start immediately after this. Thank you.
So we are going to start the closing session. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the United Nations Committee on the Exercise of the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People, I would like to thank the speakers and the audience for actively participating in this conference. During these 2 past days, we have had the privilege of hearing from Palestinian and international experts about their role in addressing the ongoing Nakba, exposing the gross violations of the occupying power, in advocating for durable and sustainable ceasefire, and in demanding accountability for Israeli war crimes. All the interventions have echoed the obligation to ensure, through domestic and international judicial mechanisms, accountability and justice in the OPT, as recently indicated in the report issued by the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, pursuant to Human Rights Council Resolution 52/3. As put by the High Commissioner, quote, "Justice is a prerequisite for ending cycles of violence and for Palestinians and Israelis to be able to take meaningful steps towards peace," unquote. Investigations are therefore needed to establish the full extent of the crimes committed by the occupying power in violation of international humanitarian law and human rights law. Those alleged crimes include unlawful killings, hostage taking, wanton destruction of civilian property, collective punishment, deprivation of essential services, strikes on civilian infrastructure, forced displacement, incitement to hatred and violence, sexual assault, and torture. I would like to thank all the experts for having traveled to Geneva to share with us their knowledge of and expertise in the question of Palestine. Our thanks go also to member states of the United Nations and their representatives in Geneva, to the civil society organizations and the media who contributed to make this conference a success. We are glad to have had the opportunity to hear so many enlightening views over the past 2 days. This conference has once again highlighted the need for the international community to stand together and join forces with civil society to achieve an end to the Israeli occupation in the OPT. I cannot refrain from mentioning the opportune timing of this event, considering the urgency of the situation in Gaza and following the laudable initiatives undertaken by some member states. We have all mentioned here South Africa as being among them. So we are very proud of that, and also our committee also has played its role also in this regard. Before I conclude, I would like to give the floor to His Excellency Ibrahim Raishi, the Ambassador of Palestine, for him to deliver his final comments.
Thank you, Excellency. مساء الخير جميعا. بداية أنا أود أتوجه بالشكر لرئيس اللجنة السفير ميانك وأعضاء اللجنة السفراء الأعزاء أندونيسيا وكوبا وماليزيا والفريق أيضا الذي عمل جاهدا من أجل تنظيم هذا المؤتمر. وأعتقد أن التوقيت صحيح أن هناك كان ضرورة زمنية، لكن نحن منشغلين البعثات في مجلس حقوق الإنسان يوم غد آخر يوم على التصويت على القرارات. هناك 38 قرار، وأنتم تعلموا عادة القرارات تأخذ وقت كبير، ونحن كفلسطين غدا سيتم التصويت على القرارات المقدمة من طرفنا، وهي 3 قرارات: المساءلة والمحاسبة وحالة حقوق الإنسان تحت البند الثاني، وقرار حول المستوطنات تحت البند السابع، وحق تقرير المصير أيضا تحت البند السابع. لكن أثناء مشاركتي معكم على مدار ليس بشكل متواصل، لأن كنت على تواصل مع عدد من السفراء، استمعت إلى كثير من الأفكار الهامة التي قد لا تكون يعني في خاطرنا ونحن نعمل في المجال الرسمي. ودائما هذا الانخراط من قبل مؤسسات المجتمع المدني مفيد لتصحيح ومساعدة الجانب الرسمي، لأن هناك بعض الأماكن التي يمكن أن تصلوها ولا نستطيع الرسميين الوصول إليها. فهذا العمل المشترك بالتأكيد سيعزز من المسار النضالي الذي يتم من أجل تحقيق العدالة للشعب الفلسطيني، وبدون حقوق إنسان لا يمكن أن يكون هناك عدالة، وبدون مساءلة ومحاسبة لا يمكن وقف هذه الجرائم. وأنتم تعلموا والعالم يعلم، أعتقد أن الكل بجيل لم يحضر أو لم يكن جزءا من الويلات التي عانتها البشرية على مدار 6 سنوات من الحرب العالمية الثانية. لكن للأسف كان نتيجة ذلك أن بعض الشعوب حصلت على الاستقلال وبدأت في منحنى آخر من أجل تطوير مجتمعاتها وبلدانها، إلا الشعب الفلسطيني الذي كان ضحية لنتائج هذه الحرب دون أي ذنب، ولم يكن لنا أي مساهمة بما حصل من ويلات في الحرب العالمية الثانية. وللأسف الذين انتصروا قرروا أن يقسموا بلدي دون أي حق، وهذا التقسيم تبعته النكبة عام 48 عندما تمت السيطرة على نصف ما هو مقرر من قبل الجمعية العامة، وحصل ما حصل من نكبة 48 وحتى هذه اليوم. حصل هناك إبادة جماعية وتطهير عرقي، والآن ما نشاهده في قطاع غزة وفي الضفة الغربية ليس بعيدا عن ذلك، لكن الآن نحن نعيش ونشاهد ذلك على الشاشات ومن خلال وسائل الإعلام المختلفة. الأمر الذي يستدعي من العالم أن يصحو الضمير الإنساني. أنا أعي جيدا أهمية القوة المالية وأهمية السلاح والقوة العسكرية، لكن هذا بدون القليل من المبادئ والأخلاق نفقد إنسانيتنا ونتحول إلى وحوش تحكمنا شريعة الغاب. هل هذا ما يريد المجتمع الدولي؟ أعتقد أننا متفقين ليس هذا هو المسار. يجب أن يكون القانون هو الدليل للجميع حتى نلتفت جميعا لمواجهة التحديات الكونية المختلفة. وحتى لا أطيل ولا أجعل من ذلك محاضرة، أود أن أشكر كل المتدخلين من المحاضرين وكل الذين تدخلوا أيضا من القاعة والأسئلة الهامة. وأعتقد أن تلخيص هذه الجلسة وهذا المؤتمر سيكون هام نسترشد به لاحقا، ونتمنى للجنة بعملها المستمر أن تبقى بهذا العزم حتى تساعدنا وصولا إلى أن نلتقي معكم بإذن الله في القدس الشرقية عاصمة دولة فلسطين. شكرا لكم جميعا.
Thank you, Ambassador Khaishi. On behalf of the committee and on behalf also of my distinguished colleagues from Indonesia, Malaysia, and Cuba, who have traveled with me here to Geneva and who have been keen to be part of the exercise, who have chaired the panels, I would like really to express our deepest gratitude for the support and collaboration of the UN office in Geneva. Ambassador Khaishi, once again, thank you very much for the excellent cooperation with the committee. I would also thank the Division for Palestinian Rights, Secretariat for all the work which has been done with so much efficacy into the organization of this event. I would like also to express our heartfelt gratitude to the interpreters and technicians for their hard work and dedication, helping us to ensure a smooth and successful conference. My thanks also go to the press officers for their wonderful job, and we count on you to disseminate all the good information which have been gathered here. Make sure that the proceedings are made known by the wider audience. The chair summary of this conference will be posted on the website of the committee at www.unispal.un.org, and a full report of the conference will be posted on the same website in due course. We have now come to the end of the conference of civil society working on the question of Palestine under the theme Building Bridges with International Civil Society to Address the Ongoing Nakba. We look forward to your participation in upcoming events of the committee this year. I now declare the conference closed. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you.